bookshop. This is very exciting for me for a lot of reasons. I'm going to introduce Ben in a second. I'm just going to let you all know that Ben and I have known each other for quite a while. Not very well. We were both at a wedding together when I was very young and you were younger.
I was a senior in high school.
And I was probably supposed to be a junior in college, but I probably wasn't. But I was a couple years older. But yeah. So Ben is the brother-in-law of one of my good friends and a writer of this amazing book, By Water Beneath the Walls. I'm going to read your actual bio because it's pretty incredible, and then I'm going to ask you a lot of questions, okay? So Ben became a Navy SEAL in 2001. He is the recipient of the Bronze Star and other awards, a native of Indianapolis, and he lives in Chicago with his 3 sons now. He wrote this amazing book, By Water Beneath the Walls, The Rise of the Navy SEALs, which came out last June?
July 20th.
July 20th, okay. But we talked about this book a long time ago. So the history of our relationship with this book was, as you can all see, and some of you have already read a lot of the book, it's quite large. It's a good one. But you cut about 600 pages?
Oh, I didn't cut 600 pages. Probably a total of 200. 200
pages, okay. So a couple of years ago, we were talking on the phone and he had a book deal with Penguin Random House, and he called me and he said, what happens if you're late on your manuscript? So he wasn't quite done with it because it was so dense and so much there that he wanted to make sure he got everything in there. So I said, I don't know, I guess if they don't do anything to you, just keep writing. So he kept writing. So when this finally came out, I was so excited. We got to promote it lots of places. It's the perfect book for any of the history buffs on your list, for yourself. And so I'm going to just start asking you a bunch of questions.
Ready?
Okay. All right. Let's see. Also, why don't you first tell them where did I see you talk that time in Pennsylvania? Because that was a really great organization.
That was, when was that? It was probably 6 months ago. It was at a consulting company. A friend of mine has a sort of a military-focused consulting company called Green Castle Consulting. Great organization. They only hire vets. Can everybody hear me? Mm-hmm. They only hire vets, and they have a sort of a team room / bar built into sort of the hub of the entire company. So at the end of the day, the lamp is lit, the tap is on, and they had, I don't know, probably 100 folks come out from Philly and the surrounding areas. And it was a nice event.
It was nice. It was nice that
it was one of my first ones, though. I think I'm a little.
Was it?
Yeah, it was one of the ones where I remember being a little nervous.
Oh.
I don't get nervous anymore. So I've done enough of these now.
No, you don't. You didn't seem nervous. It was very interesting, and it was very nice to have all the different veterans there supporting you and supporting the book. And so there's a lot of things about this book that I really liked, and if a lot of you started it, it's and we were sort of talking about this even in the car. It came up before. Why don't you tell us the reason why you wanted to write the book this way? So it's the history of how the Navy SEALs came to be, but it's not one of those like exposés. It's not one of those like tabloidy type things. It really is such a respectful history of all of the different branches of the service that had different things to offer, but it was kind of like everyone sort of knew what they needed, but nobody could get there. And so it's kind of like a trial and error type of thing. And maybe just say what made you write the book the way that you did, and what made you think like of writing it where you're looking at what the other branches of the service already offered and how it got to where it became.
Yeah, I wrote the book the way that I did because that's I selfishly wanted to read that book. I get questions like, who did you write the book for? What was your target audience? I was the target audience. This is the book that I wanted to read. And I knew that I never wanted to read a history of the Navy SEALs ever again. I'd read 2 or 3, when I was a SEAL, I'd read, a couple of these books that have been, they claim to be a comprehensive history of the SEAL teams. And I didn't like any of them. I didn't feel like they'd answered any real questions about how the SEAL teams had been formed. I didn't feel like the research had been particularly disciplined and not only that, but I didn't feel like they, really brought in, all of the other folks that helped create the SEAL teams. The SEAL teams were sort of a composite unit, and they kind of got pulled from multiple different Navy units, but they also drew a lot from all these other Army and Marine Corps units, and so I really wanted to tell a book that I wanted an excuse to tell all of these other stories. I didn't want to just tell the history of these various Navy units. I wanted to tell the history of the Army Rangers and the history of the Army Special Forces and the Marine Corps Raiders, and I wanted some sort of vehicle that would let me do that. So my idea was to sort of treat Naval Special Warfare, the SEAL team, sort of as like the central character in like a biography almost. And every good biography, whether that biography is about Alexander Hamilton or Jerusalem, it uses that central character just as sort of a vehicle to bring in all these other characters into the story. So that's why I did it.
And so from a reader perspective and a publishing person, one of my first questions is how much research, you did so much research for this book. Did you feel, when you started out, were you expecting to find such personal history, or were you expecting to write something bigger, but then when you got to see the different characters and how amazing all these different characters were and unforgettable they all were, I loved how you even went into the description of their faces. It was kind of like, to me, it felt like you were trying to respect the fact that these people were not just, part of a big story. They were actual people with, some of them didn't make it, some of them did, their injuries or the families they left behind. Did you do that on purpose to begin with, or did that happen as you got to see the people that you were actually writing about?
I did that for selfish and practical reasons. To answer your question about why I spend time actually describing what a character looks like. One, I like that as a reader. I mean, whenever I've read good history, the author takes a second to tell you what this person looked like, what they sounded like, and that it anchors that person in your head, and it anchors that person in your head for a reason, because if you describe a character in a book, you're sort of waving a little red flag to the reader that this is a person that you should pay attention to. I'm going to be telling you more about them, so. You're going to, in a book like this, I don't know how many characters, there's in excess of 500 characters in the book, but there's really only probably 30 main characters. So those 30 main characters, I'm going to spend a little bit of time just, kind of giving you a little bit of information, to plant that person in your head, so you know that this is a person to pay attention to, and not only that, but it's a person that you're going to care about, what happens to them. As far as the research, though, I knew that those details were the kind of details that I wanted. I didn't realize how hard it would be to get them. The first chapter that I wrote, I almost wrote it exclusively from my basement. The first chapter was all about the Marine Corps Raiders and about Evans Carlson and this failed raid on Macon Island. Now, Evans Carlson, he's a great character to sort of cut your teeth on because he's really weird. He's peculiar, and it was fun to write about, and it was fun to sort of experiment with how you're going to describe this person. But the great thing about Evans Carlson is that he published a lot of books before he became famous. So I was able to find these books and get a sense of who he was. There had been a lot of prior scholarship done on him. There was a lot of work that had been done on the Marine Corps Raiders that was accessible online, primary source documents, after action reports. There's been a lot on World War II. So that first draft of that first chapter, I never had to leave my basement, really. I didn't realize how difficult it would be until chapter 2. And then I knew that I needed to cover this character. This person wasn't famous. He didn't have prior published books. There were no documents online that I could access. And it was then that I realized I was going to have to go not only to various archives around the country, I was going to have to go into people's homes and letters and all of that corroborative detail that would bring these characters to life, bring them off the page and into your head. It took 10 years.
Yeah.
So I signed that contract with Random House in 2013, and it was a 2-year contract. The book didn't come out until July.
Well, I'm really glad that you took your time with it, because I feel like the way you put, it was almost like the story is so big that you told, but it's almost like one person sat down and told it to you and you transcribed it. That's how it felt to me. Like the one story about the Apache Indian in the beginning, how they leave him behind.
Yeah, James Gifford.
Oh, that was when I got to that part, I'm like, this is this kind of book. Like you start it, you think it's going to be this big history, and then when you learn about one individual person like that, you realize, I don't know, it just became a different book immediately. And I feel like that was an error. That was a lot of series of errors. So what I liked about this book was that you weren't afraid as a SEAL you weren't out there trying to be like, we never did anything wrong, even though they weren't the SEALs at the time. But you were happy, you were confident enough or respectful enough to look at all the things that went wrong in order to make what ended up being right. And I wonder, did you realize that? Like, did you when you learned about that character, were you like, wow, this has to be, I have to respect each of these deaths?
So I knew from the very beginning, if I was going to be writing the kind of book that I wanted to write, to talk about, all of the Army Marine Corps units, I was going to have to be writing about failure. I was going to have to be writing about, and I was going to have to be critical of kind of icons in the U.S. military that nobody's really ever critical about, like, Evans Carlson, Bill Darby. I mean, these are titans in the U.S. military that they have biographies that are written about them. I mean, if you go to Fort Benning, half the things at Ranger School are named after Darby. Darby, in my book, is going to be portrayed as a failure. And somebody like Evans Carlson, he had this outsized impact on the Marine Corps. He comes up with the slogan "Gung Ho." Everybody knows "Gung Ho" in the Marine Corps is this, it's this motivating phrase, or it's a phrase to describe, it's a super gung ho Marine or a super, hard charging Marine. It's not. All the Marines at the time, they hated it. But I also knew that, like, if you're going to be talking about failure, those failures had consequences, and those consequences had human consequences, and those human consequences are they're brutal to read. When you find, so James, the character that you're talking about, James Gifford, he was one of the he'd been an Apache Indian who'd been abandoned in Arizona. He was abandoned under a tree in the desert. A local woman had discovered this baby under a tree, raised the baby as her own, and then he had volunteered for the Marine Corps, immediately after Pearl Harbor. When the Marines were sort of stranded on Macon Island, he had managed to escape to the submarine. He was one of the few handful of Marines who had managed to escape to the submarine. When he knew that his fellow Marines were trapped, he was one of the handful of Marines to volunteer to go back and get them. And he did that because he had this biography of him, his own biography, that he'd been rescued. He knew that he was going to put his life on the line to go, rescue other Marines, and tragically he was left behind on the island, captured by the Japanese and beheaded. And the stories like this, these are the stories that this institution is built on. I mean, we wouldn't have, the institutions that we have without those sorts of sacrifices.
It's funny because I feel like ever since when you become a mom, I feel like maybe you feel like this about your sons too. It's impossible to read anything the way you would have read it before you have a child. So every one of the stories in this book, for every person, it meant something to me, because it's like that's the age, that's kind of the age my kids are now. And you go out there, you are expecting things to go a certain way, and then they don't, and sometimes they do, and sometimes the stories are incredibly encouraging and inspiring. So I really do think that was one of the most, important parts of the book, was that you were not afraid to put in the failures and the successes, which makes it richer anyway, and makes it more of a story that we can all relate to, I think, as readers, as Americans, as people. So I really am glad that you did that. I will say, I was talking to my sister yesterday. We went on a hike. I'll call it a hike. It was like half a mile, and there was a lizard, and it scared me. And
It was very embarrassing.
I almost didn't make it through the hike because of this lizard. And I thought, how am I going to interview Bendy the Navy SEAL, and I can't even get through a hike with a lizard? So why don't you?
It was so embarrassing.
That being said, why don't you tell us, because I'm sure other than all the amazing parts of the book that we'll get back to after that, why don't you tell us where you have to have like incredible drive to get through anything in the military, but especially to become a Navy SEAL, to get through Hell Week, to not quit. Tell us what you think, where that came from. Because I think most people that hear about Navy SEALs, there are these people that I don't think that we feel like we can relate to. So how do you feel like where did that come from in you that you knew that's what you wanted to do?
Thank you very much. That's not a question I've been asked before. I don't know. I mean, I know that I think it's as much a challenge of everybody. I had a friend who got asked a similar question on board an aircraft carrier. He wasn't a particularly well-spoken guy. He was a southern kid, and he got a question. What does it take to get through BUDS, or what does it take to get through SEAL training? His response was, BUDS is 100% physical and 100% mental. It's not great at math. That is true. It's a very difficult course. It's you're miserable for 6 months. You're miserable.
Are you
cold.
miserable, angry, or are you just miserable?
No, you're just miserable. I mean, it's a really tough course. I mean, you're cold, wet, sandy. You're uncomfortable for 6 months, and you're not like cold. You don't think that you can be this cold. Like I remember there was one time in the weeks leading up to first phase starting, and first phase initiates the conditioning course in which Hell Week is a part of. But it was before Hell Week. I remember I remember doing like 30 minutes of surf acclimatization is what they called it. It was surf torture. And after surf torture, we were going to be going to the pool for 2 hours of swimming. And I remember it was 4 o'clock in the morning, half hour in the surf, grab your fins and your mask and you're going to the pool. And I remember thinking, I'm not sure that I can do this. But I think the guys that are able to get through it are guys that are able to take this in just little chunks. They're not looking. It's like the book almost. I felt like the book was my second, crucible. Like if I had known that this book was going to be 600 pages, it was going to take 10 years, I would have quit in the beginning. But I took it just in little chunks. Like I'm not writing a book. I'm writing a chapter. And on my day-to-day I was just writing a paragraph. I want to get this paragraph. I want this to be a readable paragraph. And when I was going through training, I just want to get through. It wasn't even I want to get through today. I want to get through this evolution or this little chunk of training. I want to get through this run or this swim. It also helps that if there was one or two things that you were okay at. But it's like I was an okay runner. I was pretty comfortable in the water. I was a terrible swimmer, so I really only dreaded certain days. The days that I knew that I was going to be swimming, or a day that we were going to have, log PT, this telephone pole size log. They were just, just kind of have to compartmentalize it, I guess, a little bit and take it one little thing at a time. And those guys that aren't able to do that, those are the guys that aren't successful. Those guys that they wake up, and they know they're getting out of a warm bed, and they realize they're going to be cold all day, and not just all day, but all week, and not just all week, but for 6 months. It's too much. Nobody could do that. But if you can wake up and just be like, okay, I know I just have to be cold this morning, or I have to be cold for this little, this period, and then I'm going to do something else and I'll get warm. You'll be. I guess that's all I got.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. That's like a perfect lesson on sort of bravery and how to do it. There was sorry, I have to be a nerd. There's a book, one of my favorite books is Empire Falls. Did you ever read that?
Empire what?
Empire Falls. And then it was Nobody's Fool, same author. And it ends up being a movie with Paul Newman and I feel like Bruce Willis, isn't it? But anyway, at the one point, Paul Newman says to his grandson, he couldn't figure out how to be brave. And he said, you just have to learn how to be brave for 10 seconds at a time. And if you could do anything for 10 seconds, that's what it reminds me of.
There was one, so my grandfather, who I was very close to, he was a Marine World War II, and as it happens, when the fighting on Okinawa stopped, they were desperate for anybody that could swim to fill the underwater demolition teams. The underwater demolition teams of the UDTs were the unit that ultimately became the Navy SEALs, or the SEALs were ultimately pulled from UDT. So my grandfather volunteered to be a UDT swimmer for the invasion of Japan. So he had gone through 3 weeks of sort of buds on Okinawa. And when he knew that I was going to SEAL training, he wasn't the kind of guy that ever gave advice. He never, he was just a really great grandfather. But he took a second and he was like, hey, if you ever think in this training that you're not tough enough or you can't make it, so look around and find the person in your class that looks dumber than you. And if he's still there, you should probably be there too. And honest to God, it was really good advice. There was one guy in class who, I don't want to say his name because he's a human being, but he was just a dorky looking guy. And I'd be getting surf tortured or something miserable, and I would just like lean up and look down the line. Oh, there he is. And I'd just lay back down.
Surf tortured. Okay, so I'm sorry, I can't help it not ask questions as a mom. So that's what your grandfather said to you. Now, what if one of your sons wanted to do this? What would you, knowing what you went through in the training and all the other things and the, being overseas and being in some pretty dicey situations and dangerous and life-threatening situations, would you be able to, how would you be able to give them advice?
I think about that. I don't know. Fortunately, the boys they're all interested in the military. I have 3 sons, 13, 11, and 9. They're all interested in the military. I haven't made it I've tried not to, make it something that I want them to do. I think they are, they're my boys, so they're somewhat interested in, some of the military things that I'm interested in too. But if they wanted to go to Buds, I'm not sure. I definitely don't want them to go thinking, and be afraid of failing, and then there's this gulf between us. I don't want there to ever, be anything that they, or a reason that they think that I love them any less or anything like that. And I know this happens. I have a friend whose son recently tried, Buds, and he didn't make it. It's not great, but and Buds right now is so difficult. It's always difficult, but they started this last class with 130 guys, and they ended with 9. It's just.
Well, you can imagine when you read about what you go through and the training, how people would even get through it. So, which is why I don't know if this is weird, for you, humility wise, but it must be kind of weird to know that you're one of the people that got through it, because it's a pretty elite team of people. When you look at the course of the history, when you look at the stories in this book of the people that became, really important in these what ended up becoming the Navy SEALs, it's a pretty big deal, but it's also a pretty elite group. When you were writing the book and you were writing about these bigger characters, and even some of the side characters that did amazing things, honestly, I'm telling you, somebody like me that's I can't even stand being cold for more than 10 minutes without getting in a bad mood. And the one guy you wrote about in Vietnam that had the whole entire right side of his body, you said he had 15 holes in his body. And he said, bring me my rifle and what? And he ended up using his rifle as a cane. I thought he was going to shoot himself. And I kept thinking, I don't blame him. I think I would shoot myself. But he didn't. He used it as a cane so that he could walk, so that he could keep fighting. I mean, when you were writing this book, did you have a thought like, I can't believe I'm actually one of these people? Or did you feel more connected to the people that you were writing about? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'd seen similar things myself, so I was not surprised by things like that. And I mean, a lot of what I in that instance, that the character that you're talking about is Ron Yaw.
Yeah.
And he made himself famous in the SEAL teams because he had a trick for being able to chew glass. There's no trick to it. He just did it. He was just
I love that part.
he was just a weird guy. He just died this year. He was an absolute character. Like most of these guys are just there was nobody that I talked to, nobody that I interviewed in the process that wasn't sort of arrestingly interesting. And I think most of us are. I mean, if you ever stop and just sit down and talk with anybody, and I mean, we all have interesting stories, and most of these guys, I mean, they just they made decisions that put them in exceptional circumstances, and by deciding to be in those exceptional circumstances, they have exceptional stories. So I never really thought of it that way. I mean, I don't know. I mean, it seems pretty mundane. The whole experience seems mundane because I actually experienced it. Like, and I'm incredibly proud of the institution of naval special warfare, and I'm incredibly proud to have been a part of it. But I didn't set out to write a book that with an intent to say that the SEAL teams are the best unit that's ever existed. I never wanted to try and prove that. I'm proud of all of these various units, and I wouldn't be here without some of these other units, like the Marines and like some of the Army units that we worked with. So
well, that's actually very obvious throughout the whole course of the book. I feel like you are never writing about, that's what I was kind of trying to say before, you're not writing anything that's like some sort of like commentary on why you think this is the best group, or this is what this guy did this and he really messed up, he shouldn't have done that. It's really just, this is the story of all these different men. Some of them did really great things, some of them did really bad things, some of them did a very even combination of both, which actually made their characters even more interesting as people, because sometimes a lot of you were saying too, that some people will get they'll have like monuments and statues after them and stuff like that, but doesn't mean that they didn't mess up a lot of times too. And I thought that was really important for you to bring out, and I wondered that because I was like, you kind of have this integrity through the whole book for everybody, and even people that don't do the right thing. You have you can tell that you get it, like you're not even judging them, because I think when you're in that situation, that there's a possibility of making the right decision and a possibility of making the wrong decision. And did you find that you dealt with that throughout all of your research? Did you meet a lot of people that felt that way, or did you meet a lot of people that were like, this is what I did, and I'm not sorry about it, if that makes sense?
There's always I did impose upon myself certain rules when I was talking about characters or writing about characters. I tried not to, pick a side. I tried not to, even if there are characters that you respond to, just like there are characters that you respond to as a reader. There are characters that you respond to as a writer. There's characters that you like them. You discover things about them, and you're like, this guy seems like I would have really liked him. But you also can't use that as an excuse to lose your objectivity. You have to be able to look at this person critically, it's tough not to for a character that you do like, it's tough not to, kind of get head over heels for them and describe them and really glowing or you just have to remind yourself that this person he was a human being, and he for all the good that he did, he made mistakes too, and you just the responsibility that you have as a writer is to give a balanced take on them. And the one thing that I had to kind of come to grips with early on is that I was going to have the confidence to do that. Like, I was always going to be writing about people who have done more than me. Like Evans Carlson, I take a pretty tough look at Evans Carlson, and Bill Yarborough, and there's a huge list of these characters, but each one of them, Bill Yarborough, Evans Carlson, Bill Darby, all of these guys have done more than me. They're absolutely American heroes. But does that mean that you as a writer, you can just give them a pass? No, you have to have the confidence to be able to look at them critically. And hopefully, I was generous. There's numerous instances where I pulled punches. There was a character in the book that I knew that he had, he had another family, that nobody else knew about. I discovered that in the research, and a lot of the research that or a lot of the information that I'd gotten about this person had come from his his children and everything like that, and it was the fact that he had another family that nobody knew about, sort of a secret family, that was telling about this guy's character, and it would have enhanced the story to some degree, because I was trying to make a point that this person was, he had these sorts of character traits. But what would that have done? Like, would that have? I'm not sure it would have been. There were other ways for me to convey those traits about that person without having to, say that, and then and also just, have this poor guy's family, now realize something about their dad they did not know.
Yeah, you could tell that your research was really thorough. It felt to me that for every character that you talk about, you met somebody that was, I'm sure it's not true, but it felt like you met one of their best friends. Like, that's how intimately you felt about these characters. I'm only going to ask you a couple more things, because I have a feeling that other people are going to have questions too. But which character I thought was amazing but crazy was the Kaufman character, with the bomb diffusion and how he
Yeah,
that was crazy.
There's several characters that have kind of landed with people. I couldn't have predicted who those characters would have been, but Draper was definitely one of them. Draper Kaufman, if you haven't read the book yet, he's he's neck and neck with Evans Carlson for being the weirdest guy in the book. He's a guy who, he should never have been a military hero, or at least the kind of hero that he was. His objective, when he was a young man, all he wanted to do was be a destroyer skipper like his dad. And because of his eyesight, he had really bad eyesight, he was blocked from doing that. And when World War II kicked off, it's sort of his, the responsibility he felt to get into the war overrode everything else, overrode good decisions. he was.
And what country he was?
Yeah, he fought for three different branches, or three different militaries, three different countries. He was just an absolutely weird guy.
Yeah.
And his family is still, they're wonderful people, but you can see, I got to know his son, I got to know his daughter, and they're a little bit peculiar too. They're.
Well, it's funny because you hear about this is what I mean about this book. You hear a story, and you in another book or in a movie, and you see there's a guy defusing a bomb, and the scene, however long it is tense, but then when you read about the mindset of somebody that is then what happens, if the bomb makes a sound, you have between, what was it, 1
and 17 seconds.
I was oh God.
Yeah, they were.
It's not a lot of seconds, especially if it's one.
No, one of my favorite stories about Draper Kaufman is he after he's a ambulance driver for the French Army, after he's a POW, he joins the Royal Navy for the British. He becomes a bomb disposal officer for the British. So when the Blitz is happening in London or all around the United Kingdom, he's going around and dismantling these bombs, and some of these bombs have been engineered to not explode until bomb disposal teams get there. And if they made a mistake, or if the bomb was disturbed at all, you'd have between 1 and 17 seconds to dismantle this thing before it blew up on you. And my favorite story about just the sort of cavalierness that Draper had with us is he was dismantling a bomb that had landed in a field. It was about 100 yards away from a railroad tracks, and he had left his partner behind the railroad tracks for protection, and he had gone out alone into this cold field, and he started to dismantle the bomb. And it's cold, there's ice, he slips, his hand slaps the bomb, and he hears the buzzing sound start. He yells to his partner, get down, he jumps up, he's running across this field, and a few seconds later the bomb explodes. It rips a tree out of its roots, it throws him across the field, and when his partner comes running out, and Draper's unconscious, he manages to, he comes to, and the first thing that Draper says is, "Where are my tools?" He's worried about his tools more than he's worried about himself.
I want to do that again. I know I don't know. He stuck out to me more than a lot of the other characters in the book. Maybe because
he's impervious to danger. You can't not like him.
And it was like he was. I don't know. He was trying so hard. He knew what he wanted to do. He would not take no for an answer. It was like he just kept. I would be like, "Oh, you don't want me? Okay, forget it."
He just kept finding, paths, and that's a really great lesson for everybody. Like, especially, guys that are, reading the book and they want to be SEALs. And some of these guys that want to be SEALs, they're going to read this book. They're not going to be SEALs. They're going to go through this training, and for whatever reason, they're going to get hurt, and it's going to be too hard or whatever. They're going to find that this is not the path for them. That doesn't mean that you can't still serve your country in a really incredible way. I mean, Draper Kaufman is probably the best, example of that. I mean, he's blocked at every turn from doing the things that he wants, but that he never lets that be an excuse. He's just keeps finding paths to contribute.
Yeah, remember how I was telling you before? Any one person could be its own movie. I know you don't want to revisit a whole lot of this a lot. You already did enough work, but I think that he would make a great movie just about him.
He would. If anybody wants to make that movie, happy to consult.
I get it. 10 years is a long time to spend on something. All right, so the last thing I want to ask you is, there was a couple of quotes in the book that I really loved, but, well, first of all, wait, I have to say one. The part where and I'm bad at military terms, obviously, because it's not my thing, but the part at the, toward the end of World War II, and I feel like it's the guy who is in charge of the submarine. He gets left in charge, and he knows that it's not going to go well, and he says, "Forgive me for the mistakes I'm about to make." Do you remember that part?
Yeah, I remember that part.
That, to me, I cried for a little bit after I read that, because I thought...
Yeah, I got emotional when I found it, and I've gotten emotional a couple times when it's been read to me.
And how accurate is that moment?
It happened. It was in the Battle of Okinawa. There was a Admiral Burke, Arleigh Burke, who is the most influential person when it comes to the creation of the SEAL teams. Arleigh Burke, the SEAL teams wouldn't have been created, or would not have been a Navy unit. It would not have been created by the Navy had it not been for this character. And the reason that it was created by this character, by Arleigh Burke, is because he does not think that the Navy should take a subordinate role in conflict. He thinks the Navy, regardless of where the enemy is on the planet, he thinks the Navy should have an offensive role in fighting the enemy. So he creates the SEALs. But the reason that he thinks that is because of he has this this incredible experience in World War II, and he has numerous combat experiences in World War II, and some of them, I mean, they're incredibly meaningful to him. One of the most meaningful combat encounters that he has is in the Battle of Okinawa. In the Battle of Okinawa, there's kamikazes everywhere. The Japanese fleet is making its last stand, and he hears this young ensign come over the radio. Everyone in his chain of command has been killed. He's a junior officer, and he is now having to fight the ship. He is in charge of fighting the ship, and he knows that his ship is sinking. And so he comes over the radio and he says this, I will, fight this ship to the best of my ability. Forgive me the mistakes I'm about to make. He fights the ship to the very end, and he dies. And that stays with Arleigh Burke, for years. And he can't shake it. It's like a voice in his head. It replays all the time. And I mean, I think a lot of us have things like that. These little not motivating things, but these little failures or these little things that just stick. And that's one of those things that stuck. And he refused to have a Navy that was not as similarly oriented.
I think the fact that Burke thought about that they said the rest of his life, he never forgot those words, but the ensign, is that what it's called, said, forgive me for the mistakes I'm about to make. My last question was going to be, Burke was the longest CNO in history of the Navy. What was the most surprising thing you learned about him, and do you think there'll be another person like that, or have the times changed where somebody probably wouldn't be in that role for so long?
Boy, that's a good question. I don't know. I mean, I think we're about to we're in a new phase of conflict where I think the Navy is going to have a much more impactful role in world affairs than some of the other service branches. I mean, the two major threats that we have, China and Russia, they're both naval powers, and I think the Navy is going to will take the the lead role in those conflicts, potentially. The idea that we'll have another CNO for 6 years, I don't know. I don't know that. I don't. It seems like a job that's too big for one person already. And with the, I don't know. That's a question.
I just wondered because it was like, it seemed like it was a good thing for the Navy as a whole. I just wondered if.
I don't think there's anybody else like Burke. I mean, Burke. And part of the reason that Burke was able to be Burke is because he doesn't have kids. He doesn't have any other interests. He doesn't golf.
He gets up at 3 in the morning to
he gets up at, I mean, the only interest that he has in his entire life is the U.S. Navy. I mean, he would leave his office at the Pentagon. He would go home to another office that he had upstairs. When he got bored with that office, he would go to the basement where he had a third office. Like, he would work all the time. I don't know that anybody, regardless of how obsessive they are, can maintain that schedule. The only person that I know that has that sort of schedule is me, and it's to do something like this.
Yeah. All right. Well, I won't jeopardize any more, capitalize on any more of your time. I'll let other people ask you some questions if they have them. But I really just want to say that I really just thought this book was so incredibly well written. And to me, to read a book that's this dense about what you wrote about, and over the course of all the years that it's written, before World War II and up through Vietnam and all the different scenes, and to feel like you're almost reading a novel about people that you really connected with and were rooting for, whether they, always did the right thing or not, or whether they, became the quote unquote hero or not. I think to make a nonfiction book that meaningful is really, it's wonderful, and I hope you keep writing. Maybe you don't want to write something this major again, but I hope you keep writing something this impactful. And I think I don't know if this was so personal, that's why it was, you took such great lengths to make sure you got it right, but I hope that you keep writing this way. It's really good.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This was really fun.
Yeah, thanks. Does anybody else want to ask questions?
Yeah.
Sure. In the 200 pages, was that rabbit holes that you found yourself going down that you had to kind of pull back? Is there anything you see there that you want to maybe revisit and explore a little more?
Good question. There were, no. So what I did is, so everything that I cut, I always say I tried to leave everything on the field. So even if I cut 20 chapters, I didn't leave it behind necessarily. It's the 90% of the iceberg that you don't see. And so I had this whole, what I thought was a really, beautifully written section on the revolt of the admirals. I was trying to show in my Korea chapters, why the Navy was so, why the Navy had to show its relevance. And I had this 20-page section of, congressional hearings about how the Army and the Marine and the Air Force are trying to steal funds from the Navy, and I thought it was great. My editor read it and he was like, "What is this?" And he was right, and I had to cut it, but I took those 20 single-space pages, and I just compressed until they were, almost a diamond's worth of, information. So, I did, this other section on Dieppe, and Dieppe would be a fascinating book. Somebody just came out with a book on Dieppe, and it's really good. It's like, I don't know, guys I've been, Martin Watson's another one of those characters that, people want to hear more about, and Martin Watson would be a great, book to write. I haven't found anything that puts chronology to all the information that I have on Burke. I found a 750-page document that had never been, declassified. I had to FOIA request it and all the rest, and there's interview after interview after interview about Martin Watson. He's one of these larger-than-life characters in the book. Has his arrest record in there. He was arrested 76 times between the Korean War, or World War II and the Korean War. But it'd be really tough as a writer. I mean, you could possibly do something. You could possibly write a fictional account of Martin Watson based off everything. It would you'd have to make up a timeline for it. But excellent question.
Does anybody else have a question?
Just to kind of go off of what Kelly was saying, how she hopes you continue to write, do you have any plans to write anything else, or
do you have
ideas that you're thinking of already?
The one thing that I did when I was writing is I had the book never left. It was always in the back of my head, and whenever I was struggling with a paragraph, which is always, the question that I always had is always, what's the point? What's the point? What's the point? What's the purpose? It would just run in a loop in my head. Like, what's the point of this paragraph? What am I trying to say? Like, how does this serve the chapter? How does this serve the point of the book? When I didn't have the book anymore, that question replaced itself with what's next, what's next, what's next. And now I'm anxious all the time because I don't have what's next. I don't know what book to do. I'm reading a lot and trying to come up with an idea. I know that I will write more. I just don't know I haven't settled on that idea. Got a couple of ideas, but nothing.
Do you think it's interesting that you didn't want to write anything about your personal experience? I feel like you didn't write, you talk about it, but you didn't want to write about it. Do you feel like you ever would want to write about it, or do you, no?
No, I just don't think it's interesting. I mean, it might be interesting, but I'm interested in so many other things. Like I'm selfish that I want to write. I want to write books that I want to read. So, and I think I will probably settle on my next topic when I know that there's this book that I want to read and it just doesn't exist.
Because I feel like when you hear a book is about the Navy SEALs, written by a Navy SEAL. I think Tim, you and I talked about this. I think we thought it was going to be a little bit more of a personal story about you, and really, there's nothing in there about you as a Navy SEAL. And that's fine with you?
Yeah.
All right, I just wondered.
That's very humble.
It is.
I mean, it's just, not
If I had to do that training, I would write about it a lot.
You know.
I'm just kidding. No, but I that's kind of what made me love the book as much too, because I thought you never were like, well, this guy did this, but you know what? When I did that, I did it this way. You were like that. You could have been. I mean, you really could have been, and you weren't. And I thought that made it stronger. I think it made.
There are other people out there that are doing that. They're doing it a lot better than I could do it. So.
Well, you don't know that because you haven't tried it yet. But no, I don't. I think you're right because of the way you write. I think it wouldn't have worked. But I just think it was an interesting observation because I think I was expecting there to be more of a personal reflection. I'm not suggesting you write about it. It just sounds interesting.
It's not that my personal experiences didn't enter into the book. The one advantage that I had, I've been asked before, could a non-SEAL have written this book? I said yes. But there were things that I knew as a SEAL or as somebody who had experienced some of those things that were helpful in the writing of it. I know what Hell Week feels like. I know that your tendons contract when you're in Hell Week because you've been cold for so long and you've been shivering for so long that these tendons in your hip flexors, they kind of compress you as you're running. Everybody in Hell Week has this sort of very distinctive run. And it's because these hip flexors have been shivering for so long. I know what gunfire sounds like when it's shot at you. I know that, I know what a snap, I know that it's not a whiz, it's a snap when it's close. I know what tracer rounds look like at night. I mean, I know which water has phosphorescence in it and which water doesn't. There are these little things that would pop up, yep, I know, I mean, you get to the edge of your research and you don't have any more information. So I know, without even being able to see it in a document, that when Buck Halpern is holding binoculars to his eyes on a rocking landing craft, he's gonna tuck his elbows into his chest because you can't do it any other way. So there's those little things that you know.
Yeah, and I think that's another reason why I think the book is so strong too, is because you're not, especially because a lot of it is, like we were saying before, is based on some of the things that went wrong and things that went right. And I think the way that you come across is, well, this is just kind of how it is. And I think if you were in a SEAL, it would have come across it wouldn't have come across as respectful or as intelligently told.
Well, maybe I think it would have been a little bit more in awe. I don't think there was no character that I wrote about that I was in awe of. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
As I've worked with people that that any normal person would be in awe of. They're mostly just normal guys. One of the best examples that I have of that is this guy Tommy Norris. Tommy Norris is a SEAL that lots of books have been written about him. He was awarded a Medal of Honor for rescuing this downed Air Force navigator. He parachuted behind enemy lines into North Vietnam. They send numerous rescue parties to go find him. 11 Americans are killed in the process, through these 11 days. And he manages with one other Vietnamese frogman to go find this pilot and bring him home. 6 months later, Tommy Norris is on a mission in the demilitarized zone. He gets shot through the eye, and he's left behind. He's left for dead. And there's another SEAL said, "I'm not going to leave him," and he runs back 400 yards, fights his way back 400 yards through Vietnamese, grabs Tommy Norris, grabs another wounded Vietnamese guy, and then swims 2 miles out to sea for a destroyer to pick them up. He's also awarded the Medal of Honor. This guy, he has all of these incredible stories about him. And when I was interviewing him, the only thing that he wanted to do was talk about, his subsequent career in the FBI and all these funny stories that this guy had, in the FBI. My favorite one was he was investigating a white supremacist group in Idaho, and he'd been up on a wire, like so we've been listening to conversations, this white supremacist, and he knew that this guy was dropping his dog off at the vet for some procedure, and he knew how to impersonate this guy's voice. So he calls the vet, and he says, "Hey, since my dog is in there, why don't you go ahead and neuter him?" And so next day, this white supremacist,
That's what he wanted to talk about.
Tommy Norris is an absolutely larger-than-life character. He's an American hero. And here, talking to him on the phone, all he wants to do is talk about these funny little, stories from...
Makes sense. That makes sense. Well, because if you did want to sit back and talk about yourself, you probably wouldn't be the guy that had those things to talk about anyway. Did the dog get neutered?
He did.
Does anybody else have any questions for Ben?
Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you.
This is great. So the Navy SEALs always were portrayed as, covert, secret, sometimes didn't exist. They weren't there. We were never here. You don't know where we are. You don't know where we're going. Having that life, understanding it comes with a lot of challenges, but when you step back to take a look at the story of how they came to be, and understanding a lot of military history and sensitive issues, how did you deal with the challenges of navigating classified information or potentially classified, uncovering, because those operations were always, they weren't for the infantry to know, they need to know only, and
Yeah. Well, everything has a shelf life, even classification. So the standard military classification is 25 years. So once it hits 25 years, doesn't necessarily mean it's declassified, but you have to have a justifiable reason to keep it classified. So I intentionally cut my book off in 1976 because I didn't want to have to deal with any classification issues. It could have gone longer. It could have gone all the way up to, Neptune Spear in 2011. It could have just been this monumental, taken another 10 years, but I could have. But I intentionally cut it off there because I wanted to write a book that had, all the sorts of detail that, this one had. And I knew that I would have to rely just on first-person interviews if I, kind of edged up against that timeline, and I didn't want to write that book. I had discovered along the way that everybody who had written a book based off of just interviews that were, instead of all the documents, all the contemporaneous documents that had been written at the time, they were telling stories, and they were stories that were, most of the time not true. So if you're a writer and you're a writer of history and you want to be a disciplined writer of history, you have to impose, kind of strict rules on yourself. And I'm not a historian. I would never say that I don't have a PhD or anything like that. That doesn't let me off the hook. I still have to abide by the same rules that a historian would use. I always thought of myself more as a writer or somebody who was trying to just tell a story. But yeah, like I said, it doesn't let you off the hook. But it's also, to your point about how the SEALs are supposed to be covert, supposed to be secret, everybody knows about them now. They're probably the most out there unit in the U.S. military, and for whatever reason, the public has latched onto them as this, as the unit that's probably done the most of the war on terror. And I don't think that's absolutely not true. There's all of these other units have contributed immensely, and for whatever reason, the SEALs have received a disproportionate share of interest and accolades. And I don't know why that is. I still don't. After spending 10 years thinking about this topic, I don't know why. I don't know why the public is so interested in. I think the institution is. I think it's a valuable institution to understand. I think the book is interesting just as a. Bless you. No, it's interesting just to see how organizations evolve, and I think it was. And I think the institution is interesting in the way that it does missions that it shouldn't do. but I don't know why we've sort of settled on it, or why the public has sort of settled on it. I think some of it comes with the cachet of having, you know, this really, really difficult training pipeline. And it does. I was a bit self-conscious when I started writing on it. Like, people had said, you know, when I was a kid and I was attracted to this, you know, in some ways I was attracted to it because it had this reputation as being the hardest training curriculum. I didn't know if that was true. Having studied all the other units and studied all their curriculums and their pipelines and everything, now I know that it absolutely is true. It is by far the hardest. So I do think a lot of it is, or a lot of the accolades, or a lot of the interest is a result of the training, but it's also a result of, you know, some of these missions. I mean, you know, killing, Bin Laden. I mean, it's you know, and we have to remind ourselves always, it was a Navy unit that did it. Why? Like, I mean, I think that contradiction, we all like contradictions. We all like to hear, you know, underdog stories, you know, and I think maybe that's probably part of the reason.
Do you think it's, sorry, do you think it's because like movies, you know, it's like one of the units that we hear more about, so some of the other units that you mentioned that are sort of comparable to the SEALs, as a civilian I've never heard of, you know, there's a few that I've never heard of. Do you think it's because of like movies and TV shows have focused a lot on SEALs, whereas maybe the other units you don't have those sort of things?
I do, but I think the movies and TV shows, you know, focus on these units because there's actual interest. I think the interest is there, and that's why I mean, I always say, you know, when people are critical, you know, why are there so many SEAL books? I always say, because people read them. Like, there's interest in it.
Okay.
In a way that there's not interest in the Rangers and the Green Berets. I think there should be interest in those, and that's why I tried to connect, you know, the SEAL legacy to those legacies. I think those institutions are just as interesting, just as compelling, and they've been just as consequential as the SEAL teams. I just don't know why, you know, the public isn't as interested in them.
Interestingly, I was thinking, this book is very much this book is so much about the other branches of the service as much as it's about the Navy SEALs anyway. I think you get to page like several hundred pages in before it even mentions the term SEALs, which is, that I thought was interesting too. I think maybe 300 pages in before it even says the word SEAL, which is interesting. So.
Chapter 9.
Chapter
9 is the first mention. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's obviously about how all these different military operations work together and became this machine, but not on its own and not because of itself, which is how you end the book, which I think is a great way that you end it too. Anybody else have any questions?
Back to your story, just not detailed, but your sons, 13, 11, 9. You get much questions about your active time from them, or not so much?
No, not many. Like I'm just dad. They had they.
When did you end your active service?
2010.
Okay.
So, and my youngest son was born in 2012.
Okay.
So but I started working on the book in 2013. But I was working on the book, you know, at least a year before I got the contract. I've been working on the book for as long as he's been alive. He's 9 now, and they've always known me to be working on this book. It's always just been Dad's, you know, Dad's project, and but they've never really thought anything of it. It was only a few days ago, maybe a week ago, that one of my middle son, one of his friends on the bus pulled up the Jocko podcast, and he started playing the Jocko podcast, and he's like, "Is this your dad?" And he's like, "Yeah, that's my dad." And Jocko's method of interviewing, he would read big sections of the book, and then he would look at me and wait for me to comment. And I think that was the first time my middle son had ever heard, you know, the book. He'd ever heard anything written about it. And he came home and he was like, "Dad, you really wrote that?" I was like, "Yeah, I really did." Thanks, buddy.
Have you taken any time to journal yourself some of your activities, some of your times in the SEALs?
No,
You can share with
and
yourself?
what's funny is I noticed that I have for whatever reason, my brain's really good at like remembering names, dates. I mean, I can look on these shelves and I know, I know, if I haven't read a book, I know the author, and I know other books that author has written, I know. I mean, my brain works that way. My brain does not work that way on myself. I don't remember personal dates. I don't remember, like I seem to have like a 10-year shelf life in my brain. I don't journal, and I should.
Was better for the part. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, the audiobook process was a little funny. They weren't going to do an audiobook, and now half my sales are on audio. Like I had to, because I signed the contract back in 2013, they didn't normally at that time, bundle the audiobook rights in with the contract. So my agent, he said, well, we'll negotiate the audiobook rights when we get closer to the launch. My agent passed away, and so we were getting closer to the launch, and I was like, maybe we should do an audiobook. Fortunately, they did, and I was.
Well, audiobooks are totally a different animal than they were in 2013.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. I'm glad they did, but I know what you're saying. Well, I could ask you more questions, but I won't. I feel like I've asked you enough. And if anybody else wants to ask any last questions, but if not, Ben is happy to.
Maybe I'll move over there. And
How does your mom sleep at night? That's what I'd like to know. His other brother's in the CIA, FBI.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I don't know how you're
Probably not well.
No. Oh,
I guess I have one last. Maybe this is a good last question. If anybody else has. Okay, so 2001, you became a SEAL, or you went through training in 2001. So obviously, you had a career in the military, the Navy before. You came in to the military, the Navy. Did you go to Great Lakes? Did you always aspire to be that SEAL? Because I know when you go to the recruiter, you don't get that. You're going to SEAL training if you want to go to SEAL training. You don't go to dive training from the recruiter. You actually get there through some choices that you make. And then, so obviously, at some point you decided, maybe the SEALs is for me. I'd like to try that. How did that go for you? Did you feel like you had a calling or something, an interest?
Yeah, I mean, I knew that.
It's kind of a neat story to hear from individuals themselves.
I mean, it's not like now when everybody knows what SEAL teams are, and everybody there's documentaries about it and everything, documentaries about the training. It wasn't like that for me. But I knew from a very young age, 12, 13, that I wanted to do this. I found out what the SEAL teams were, and I was kind of hooked. But I tried to go the officer route. I graduated from college. My last year of college, I started really working out a lot, 3-a-day workouts. Didn't take one hot shower for a year. Was trying to prepare myself mentally and physically for it. Put a package together for an officer spot, and it was my PT scores were good, but I didn't realize how competitive it was. I mean, there were only 60 officer slots a year for SEALs. 30 went to Naval Academy, 15 went to ROTC, 15 went to OCS, and I was competing for one of 15 spots. And I didn't realize that you had to have letters of recommendation from admirals and senators and things like that. I had a letter of recommendation from my high school soccer coach. I wasn't even a starter. So when my OCS application was denied, I didn't know what to do. So I just walked over to the enlisted recruiter's office and signed up. I signed a little contract for a SEAL Challenge that guaranteed that I would get a shot at BUDS. And 5 days later, I was gone.
Thanks for your service.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks. Anyone else? Thanks, Ben.
Thank you.
For
This was
answering
really
all
fun.
those
Thanks
questions.
everybody for coming.
Thank you.
And yeah, you can sign books by the wine. That's your reward. Or you can stay here and I can bring
Oh,
you
no,
one.
great, yeah.
Okay.